Good afternoon and welcome back to those of you who've been on our earlier sessions, and welcome to anyone who's just joining us for IML's Virtual Development Day. My name is Parminder Sandhu. I'm one of the Corporate Solutions Managers here at IML, and I'll be hosting this session with Grant today. It's been a really big day. We've had some great facilitators, Barney, Mark and Rupert, deliver some fantastic sessions, and we're finally closing off with Grant, who's delivering a really interesting topic on how to have difficult conversations with your boss. So I'm really intrigued to get some really practical tips. A couple of reminders from me before we kick off and I introduce you to Grant. Grant, if I could just get you to change the slide to our action plan. So you will have received this in an email from us yesterday and this morning. It's really important that we use things like this to transfer the learning back to the workplace at IML. That's what we're all about, and that's really where the rubber hits the road. The action plan is a really quick way for you to record your key learnings. We've made it super easy for you in this template. You can print it out or you can just jot those notes down on a bit of paper, but really to make some commitments to the mindset and behavioral changes that are going to help you make the most out of what you learned today. Some housekeeping. Grant, if I could just get you to change that slide. Thank you so much. The session is going to run for 45 minutes. We're not actually going to be taking any questions, but you can send them through. We'll take them at the end, not throughout. So please do send through any questions, any comments, any feedback. We will be able to take on any ideas or thoughts that you've had. Libby and myself will be there and chatting to you. Remember, as with all of our webinars and the rest of our development days, you'll be sent the recordings for all the sessions that you've registered for and any resources that I mentioned throughout any of the sessions today. And for Grant, you can request by emailing info@managersandleaders.com.au. I'll remind you of that email address at the end too. And I really wanted to encourage you, before the session ends, you'll be given an option to give feedback. I'd really appreciate it. If you could pop your thoughts and your comments in there, it helps to make sure we keep the content for these sessions really relevant and practical for you. So now to introduce you to Grant Witherington, your facilitator for this session on how to have a difficult conversation with your boss. So Grant is a well-respected, engaging and energetic facilitator and coach who believes the secret to an organization's future lies in its ability to engage, empower and inspire its own greatest assets, its people. He uses his significant experience as a senior leader and change agent to help clients create a leadership culture that drives business results by harnessing the power of its people. Can't really argue with that. I'm going to hand over to you, Grant, now, and I'll see you at the end for questions.
Thank you very much, Parminder. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and welcome everyone. Welcome to the last workshop for today. So I hope you've come prepared for some great learning about managing those difficult conversations with your boss. The reason why I think this is such an important subject for people to understand is from two aspects. One is really the importance of developing the ability to manage up in the workplace. A lot of people have the wrong idea about what managing up is all about. So I want to address that with you today. Secondly, part of the managing up process is being able to have those tough conversations with your boss. Now, we all go through those situations at times when we feel that we want to speak up or that we need to speak up, but we just don't know how to do it. Having been through many experiences over my many careers where the only way to really get the kind of outcome for myself and the organisation was to have those sorts of conversations, I'd like to share with you today the learnings that I've got from that, and hopefully it will help you on your journey. First of all, when we talk about managing up, understand that it's about developing the right kind of working relationships with the people to whom you report. A lot of people understand the ability to be able to manage downwards, to manage your team. But whenever I talk about managing up, it's generally a bit of a 50-50 split. Some people know what it's about, some don't, and that those who do know about it, 50% of those have the wrong take on what managing up is all about. So to understand how to manage up, first of all, you really need to understand your manager's role. Understand what they're there to achieve, and understand, if you can, what their working style is. Everybody is different. There are people that we sometimes find it very easy to get along with. There are leaders sometimes that we don't naturally gel with, but if you understand and can appreciate their style, that goes a long way to helping you managing up. And the third thing is you need to understand yourself and your role in the workplace. So a quote from Liz Simpson, who authored Why Managing Up Matters. She says, the goal of managing up is not to curry favor. It's about being more effective. Because one of the challenges that I sometimes get about managing up is that people think it's about trying to put yourself in the best possible light with your boss, which is really not what it's all about. It's not about trying to be a teacher's pet, and it's not something that we should look upon in a negative way. If done correctly, it not only helps yourself, but it helps your boss and it helps the organization. So throughout today's presentation, I'll keep coming back to this concept of it being a win-win situation. 3 common misconceptions that people have about managing up is that, number 1, it means I get to control my boss. Some people out there are probably rubbing their hands together and thinking, great, I get the chance to control my boss. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. It's not about controlling anyone. It's not about manipulation. This is all about relationships. Every success in life, whether it be business or personal, comes down to your ability to build strong, effective, and mutually beneficial relationships. In the workplace, we need to be able to manage relationships in all directions, with our direct reports, with our peers, and also with our direct manager and even those above. Become more influential in the workplace, we need to understand how to have conversations with anybody. With the bosses, sometimes it seems to be that's where people get stuck on having difficult conversations. Another misconception is that only leaders can manage. But the truth is that everybody has a role and responsibility to be a great self-manager or self-leader in the workplace. And when you take the right kind of approach to managing up, you can see that managing relationships in the workplace is not just about what your boss needs to do to manage a relationship with you. Relationships are a two-way street, as most people understand from real life outside of the workplace. So in order to manage relationships properly, both sides need to be active in managing those relationships. And another misconception is that managing up means that you never get to move up. If we're doing everything that we can to help our boss become more successful, does that mean that now we get stuck where we are? I can only speak from my own experience, and that is to say that every step that I've had up the ladder over my 3 careers now has only come because of my ability to build strong relationships vertically, not just with my direct reports, but with senior leaders. And so I've never found managing up to be anything that prevents me from being able to go to the next step. When you think about it, when you're managing up and you're creating these win-win situations for yourself, your boss, and the organization, you end up standing out for all the right reasons in the workplace. And that's what marks you as someone who has great communication skills, who has a great work ethic, and who sees the bigger picture that the organization is trying to achieve. Those things do not hold you back. So in the next 40 minutes, you're going to discover why it's important that everybody learns to master the skill of managing up. You're going to learn how to prepare for and conduct these tough conversations. A bit of a caveat here. They're called tough conversations because they're tough conversations. Learning how to manage up doesn't make a tough conversation an easy conversation. It just makes it easier to manage the tough stuff. Does that make sense? And the last thing is, we're going to talk about what to do when things don't go as planned. If you do all of the things we talk about here, there's a really, really good chance that you're going to get a great outcome. But the best laid plan of mice and men often goes astray. And as someone once told me, even the greatest battle plan doesn't survive first contact with the enemy. Not that the boss is the enemy, but I think you get my drift. So we're going to look at what to do when things don't go as planned, because the whole reason why we do this is not just to get an outcome for ourselves, but to do so whilst maintaining relationships. Who is this for? If you have a boss, then I guess, loosely speaking, this is for you. If in particular, you're interested in how to get the best possible relationship with your boss, then this is for you. If you're interested in how you can become more influential beyond your role and beyond your immediate authority, then this is for you. All that I ask is that, for the next 40 minutes or so before we get to question time, just keep an open mind. There's going to be a few things here that may challenge a few people, and that's okay. I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up at question time. But I've found that if you keep your mind open, it grows. So whatever preconceptions you have about managing up and about dealing with difficult conversations, just park them for the next 40 minutes or so. And if you find that what I talk about here resonates with you, then take it and use it. You're more than welcome to it. But if it doesn't, with all things I say, throw it away and find something that does. Okay. So we're going to talk about a step-by-step approach that I've found really, really effective for managing these difficult conversations with the boss. As I said, I've had to have a few of these conversations over a few decades now, and I would never say that I'm an expert at having difficult conversations, because each one comes with its own set of challenges. But like most people, I like a plan to follow. I like to have a bit of a step-by-step process so that I know that I've covered all of the bases before I go into it. Having difficult conversations with the boss can be scary for a lot of people. It can involve perceptions of great risk. So if you've got a plan, if you've got a roadmap to follow, it increases your chances of success significantly. So the process we're going to follow is a 6-step process. First of all, we talk about making the decision to speak up, because you've got to figure out if this is the right thing for you to do. You never just jump into having a difficult conversation without thinking about the possible ramifications of it. Secondly, we talk about how to prepare for the conversation. If you fail to plan, as the saying goes, you plan to fail. So the secret sauce of a successful, difficult conversation with your boss is what you put into the plan inside of it. Then we talk about the right and the wrong way to ask for the conversation. So we want to make sure that you have the right approach here to be able to ask for the time of your manager to have this conversation at a time that's mutually convenient. Once you get into that conversation, we'll talk about how you initiate that conversation. Once you're in the conversation, to manage that conversation, to keep it on track, keep it moving forward and focusing on win-win. And at the end, how to arrive at a resolution. If you follow these 6 basic steps, you generally find that your difficult conversations are a lot easier to have. They're still difficult conversations, but they don't have to be impossibly difficult conversations. So without further ado, let's get into step 1. Step 1 is making the decision to speak up. Now, this can be a really tough step for some people, because I know out there that roughly about half of you feel comfortable with taking a certain element of risk, and it's probably about half of you that feel uncomfortable with taking risk. So think about why you should be having this conversation in the first place. The old saying is, choose your battles. So make sure that you ask yourself the question, is this a prudent conversation for me to be having? Understand that when you have a tough conversation, not everything goes the way that you plan. So just make sure that you're aware of potential consequences, good or otherwise, and make sure that you're prepared to accept the outcome. I like to say that don't bet more than you're prepared to lose, which is probably why I don't gamble, because I don't like losing anything. But ask yourself, if I'm in a situation such as maybe I've got a bad performance review that I think was unfair, maybe I've got a co-worker who's making it difficult for me to do my job, maybe I just don't like the way that my manager is managing me, maybe they micromanage, and I like to have a bit more freedom. So a good question to ask yourself at this stage in making the decision is, can I fix this problem by speaking up? If you think you can fix the problem by speaking up, then that's a great start. If you don't think you can fix it, then perhaps you need to ask yourself the question, can I at least improve this situation by speaking up? Because, we may not get the situation to be perfectly back the way we want it, but we may at least be able to exert some influence to improve the situation so that it's not as bad as it was if we didn't say anything. But sometimes we can't fix a situation, sometimes we can't improve the situation, and we have to ask ourselves, can I live with the situation the way that it is? I use these three questions generally helping people to take accountability for their decisions and for their actions. It's important to know when you step off, you make a decision to take action, that you're doing it for all the right reasons. However, if you say no to all of those questions above, no, I don't think I can fix this by speaking up. No, I don't think I can improve it. No, I don't think I can live with the situation the way that it is. Then at that stage, you start to consider what your options are and why you where you are at the moment. If you decided that, yes, look, I think I can fix or I think I can improve the situation, then that's generally the first step for deciding, okay, I'm going to take action on this. Ask yourself, is it a prudent risk? The second step is preparing for the conversation. Now, this is where, for those of you who don't like sitting down and planning, you're going to be a bit disappointed because you need to grab a pen and a piece of paper and sit down and really, really think about how you're going to progress this conversation with your boss. Most of the success that you get will come from your preparation for the conversation. So first of all, don't overthink it. I know there's a tendency for some of you, because I have fallen into this trap before, of thinking so much about the problem, thinking through the possibilities, trying to figure out, if this happens, do I go that way? And you end up overthinking it to the point where you just decide not to take any action. So try not to overthink the situation. You just need to prepare for it, but don't talk yourself out of it unless you've got a really good reason, such as, you know what, this isn't really worth the risk. In preparing for the conversation, I've got a number of questions that I think is really, really worth you writing down now and making sure that you answer each and every one of these. So number one, what is the issue? Be clear about the issue before you go in. If you're not clear about the issue and you're responding from, say, an emotional base, often you get into these kind of conversations, and once the emotion is dissipated, you aren't really sure what the issue is. You were just upset or angry or disappointed about something. So be clear about the issue. And secondly, be clear about the facts. When you're having a conversation with your boss, a difficult conversation, it could be about you and them. It could be about you and a work colleague. It could be about some situation in which the boss can assist. So make sure that you're clear on what the facts are. So for example, a fact would be my work colleague frequently disrupts my work. But to say my work colleague is annoying is not a fact. That's a judgment. So make sure that you understand what the facts are. The funny thing about facts is they tend to change depending on what position you look at them from. So also ask this question of yourself: how might this look from my boss's perspective? A lot of people make the mistake when going into having a difficult conversation with the boss with only considering things from their own perspective. So what happens is they go charging into this conversation, they've thought their side through, but they've never really considered how the boss might see this. And then when confronted with a different perspective, they go, oh, okay, yep, I get that now. It might have been helpful for you to understand that before you go in. So how might this look from the boss's perspective? It also helps to understand how this might look from a third-party observer. Again, when you can step outside of yourself and start to look at a difficult situation you need to discuss with your boss from their perspective and from a third-party perspective, it can give you insights and tips about the situation that can have a great impact on if and how you actually proceed to have a conversation with the boss. Number 5, what do you want for you? A difficult conversation is not you going into the boss, letting loose about how badly you feel about something or other, and then having no idea what you want as an outcome. Be clear in your own mind so that you can be clear with your boss what sort of outcome you want. Also, think about what sort of outcome you want for the boss. If you go into these sorts of conversations just thinking about what you want and how you want to win, you don't think about things from the boss's perspective, the whole thing becomes a little bit unbalanced. These conversations work best when you understand what you want to get out of it from the boss. And this is what a win-win conversation looks like. I understand what you need, boss, and I will try to respect those needs. However, I also have my own needs here, and I need to make sure that we both respect those. Be clear on what a resolution might look like. Okay. It's one thing to have a difficult conversation with your boss, but it's a completely different thing just to go in and drop a problem on their desk and have no idea of this potential solution or solutions that could be used. If you put yourself in the boss's position, and I've been in that position many times myself, I would much rather that people come to me with solutions rather than problems. Makes my job a lot easier, makes the conversation go a lot easier. And you know what? I may not be able to think of a solution that's effective at the time, but if you give me a potential solution, it might be a case of, that sounds totally reasonable, let's do that. And lastly, think about how the boss might react. If you understand your boss and you've got a pretty good relationship with them, you might understand whether or not they will see you raising this issue with them as, would it be a threat to their authority? Would it be seen as criticism? Would it be seen as you not really understanding what they're trying to do? If you understand how they may react, then you can understand how you need to respond to that. In all cases, the old adage applies: the first person to lose their temper loses the argument. So regardless of what happens, be prepared for it and make sure that you are the one that is approaching things in an emotionally even-handed way. Once you're prepared for the conversation, fairly simple step, ask for the conversation. You know, too many people send an emotionally loaded email, you know, and I'm sure a few of you probably have at some stage hit send on something only to regret it and not be able to get it back. And don't ambush your boss at the coffee machine either. We need to make sure that you want their full attention, and you need to have this on their time so that you can have a full and frank conversation. So an example might be, look, I've been reviewing my objectives for the upcoming 12 months. I've got a few ideas that I'd like to discuss with you. Does Thursday work for you? So you don't give them too much information. Keep it simple, ask for their time. If you give too much information, then you might sort of start to steer the conversation in a direction before we get started. Very simple, don't wait the boss's time. Need to have a conversation, just want to have a chat about X, Y, Z, when is convenient for you. You can get into the details when you get into initiating the conversation. So you may have emailed your boss, you may have spoken to them in a hall, you may have rung them up and asked for this conversation. It shows respect for their time, which is really, really important. When you have their time, then make sure you make the most of it. You've now got an interview with them, you go in, you sit down to have the boss. It's now time to initiate the conversation with the boss. First of all, open with a statement that reminds you both of a shared goal. It's important, if you want to make sure that the conversation goes the very best way that it can, that you are all both clear on a goal that you share. It shows that you're on the same page, and it shows that you have the bigger interests of the team or the organization at heart. So it might be, I know and I understand that continuous improvement is really, really important for our team. There's something about a recent change that's been concerning me, and I just want to have this conversation around those changes, if that's okay with you. Number two, and this one's a big one, keep your ego at bay. Too often, I think, people go into these meetings, and because they are nervous going in, that some of those nerves turn into emotions which aren't particularly helpful during the meeting. What you're trying to do at this meeting is to seek redress for a problem. You've got a tough situation. It's either involving the boss or the boss can help that. And so make sure that when you approach the conversation, you do so even-handedly. It doesn't mean that you don't have emotions. You might be upset. You might be frustrated that a project was taken off of you and given to someone else. You might be angry that you got feedback that you thought was not fair. It's okay to have emotions, but the thing is, you can't allow those emotions to drive the conversation. Thirdly, frame the conversation gracefully. I always say, be very, very careful how you choose your words because you may end up eating them. So gracefully means that you are speaking in a polite, even-handed way. You understand that there's an issue here that needs to be addressed, but you don't paint yourself as the victim. Yes, it's okay to say, look, something's happened. I feel that I've been wronged in some way, but just don't paint yourself as the victim, because wherever there's a victim, it's assumed that somewhere there's a persecutor. And it may be that if you're playing the victim, then it may be implied that your boss is the persecutor or the problem, and that doesn't help take the conversation forward in any meaningful way. So explain how that you've been felt wrong, you feel you've been wronged in some way, but also be prepared to accept that you may have had a part to play in whatever the issue is. Perhaps I didn't understand the communication you sent me, but XYZ. Maybe I read something into this message that wasn't there, but I felt X. So when you approach the conversation gracefully, you're fully accepting that maybe you've got this wrong, but you just want to get some clarity here. It's not about charging into the boss with a big stick and demanding things your way. This is about bringing two people together and being able to solve a problem that one of you has in a way that maintains the relationship for both. Step number 5 is to manage the conversation, manage the discussion effectively. Start by explaining the situation and the context of the situation. This is why we're here to have this conversation. It could be that you feel, okay, look, the reason why I wanted to talk to you today, Mr. or Mrs. Boss, is because, in a recent feedback, I felt that there were certain elements of my work that weren't fully appreciated or weren't fully visible. And this is something I just need to discuss with you because it's left me feeling a bit worried, upset, frustrated, or whatever. When you've explained the situation and you've explained the context, ask for their perspective. It may be that they have a completely different perspective to you. And once you hear their perspective, it is also quite possible that you might go, okay, I kind of get that now. And it can actually mean that you don't have to have the rest of the difficult conversation. I remember being approached by one of my team members once who raised the issue of a decision that I'd made. And she said, look, I have to tell you, to be completely honest, I disagree with your decision. And, I kind of got that, as a boss, sometimes we have to make the decisions that people aren't happy with, but, give her the time and hear her out. And during the conversation, I said, look, is it okay if I explain information I had at the time that maybe you didn't, that kind of coloured my approach? Once I was able to explain my perspective of the situation, she then completely changed, said, look, I get that now. I agree, I support your decision. It doesn't always work that way. But the thing is, if you don't try and get your boss's perspective, if you don't try to see things from their point of view, then how can you ever get to some kind of meaningful outcome? We need to show that we understand not just our own perspective, but everyone else's. It also shows that you're not being selfish. arrive at a mutual understanding. If only it was as easy as just saying those 5 words, arrive at a mutual understanding. But this is where another place where people kind of get stuck is that they think that their opinion is the be all and end all, and they expect the boss to shift to their way of thinking. But it may be that there are things within the situation that you're presenting that, you know what, we both have to have an agreement or an understanding about what has occurred here. So listen to the boss's feedback, and if you're not sure, ask for clarification. And it may be that you come to different conclusions. That's also okay. What you want to make sure you don't do is that you just try to make excuses for what might have gone wrong. If it turns out that during the conversation, actually you made the mistake, maybe it was something you didn't understand, maybe you read something into a communication that wasn't intended, and you've gone to have this conversation with your boss, and now all of a sudden you're like, okay, I kind of get that now. Have the humility to admit if maybe you were wrong. There's nothing that derails difficult conversations quicker when people dig in and try to insist that they're right, or they make excuses for why things are the way that they are. The aim here is to achieve a win-win outcome. Again, I stress, having a difficult conversation with your boss is not about having a win over your boss. It's about having a win for you, a win for them, and a win for the organization. If you're not motivated by that, then my advice would be don't have a conversation in the first place. It's got to be win-win. The last step, which also sounds like it's an incredibly easy one, but it's really not as easy as it sounds, is arrive at a resolution. Now, at this point, you want to make sure that you note any discrepancies in viewpoints. Okay? You may need to revisit the conversation and say, okay, so when you said this, it sounded like you meant that. And have I got that? Have I got that right? You know, confirm that you have a clear understanding of what the other person has said and a clear understanding of the positions that people take. Then negotiate an agreement that you can both be satisfied with. It may be that, you know what, whatever you went in there to argue the case for, you get. That's fine. In my experience, a lot of times it's something that both people are satisfied and walk away with something that they didn't have going in. So negotiation is about making sure that both parties walk away happy and that nobody feels ripped off. Make sure you make commitments with each other that you both benefit from. And it's really, really important to make sure that you both walk away feeling you've had a win. If you walk away feeling great, yes, I've had a great chat with the boss, I got what I wanted, and the boss is really not quite sure whether they've been heard or whether they've given up more ground than they're prepared to give up, then it's not been an effective conversation. Yes, you got an outcome, but did it improve the relationship? Keep coming back to the relationship and whether or not you're actually doing work to enhance the relationship, or whether if you're competitive and just want to go for the win, maybe this isn't a conversation you should have. And make sure that you record your agreement so you've got something to come back to later on. And it's really important to have an action plan, because without an action plan going forward, it's just been a conversation. And share the action plan with your boss. Okay, look, I'm so glad we had a chance to conversation about X, Y, Z. I felt that I've been heard, and I feel that you've given me some feedback that I need to take on board. There are some things that I'm going to try. Here's my action plan for going forward. It's great to get your boss's input on that as well, because this is part of a learning and development plan for you. And it shows that there's been a valuable outcome for the conversation, and that it wasn't just a chance of a case of you having a whinge with them. Nobody likes to, for those of you in leadership positions who have to deal with people having different conversations with you, this isn't about just letting people have a whinge. So don't go in and just complain to get your own way. Really think about how you get a win out there for everyone. And just make sure you thank them for their time. It's important that we acknowledge, respect, and appreciate the time that the bosses give us to have these conversations, because these sorts of things aren't easy. They're not easy for you, and they're certainly not easy for the boss as well. That being done, you should be in a great position to get some acknowledgement, get some solution that you're really, really hoping for. Maybe you've got a review of the feedback that you weren't happy with. Maybe your boss is giving you more autonomy over a decision instead of micromanaging you. So this is great. You've got a great outcome, and hopefully you've been able to maintain a relationship as well. So I've put together a list of top tips. These are simple takeaways to think about whenever you need to have these tough conversations with the boss. Number one, think like a consultant. Now, when you think about it, a consultant goes into an organization and looks at the way things are done, and they come up with solutions that keep the customer happy. It gets the right kind of outcome, everybody's happy. The consultant, though, does not have any emotional attachment to the situation that they're there to address. So if you think like a consultant, it means you can go into this thinking, okay, what's the best kind of outcome that we can get here for everyone without being emotionally attached to it? Secondly, avoid, if at all possible, taking the I want this approach. It sounds a bit one-sided, if you just going into a difficult conversation, just knowing what you want and being demanded about I want X. A better approach would be to say, look, the solution I want is something that's good for the business and that makes sense and it's good for all of us. So wherever possible, approach the solution from that perspective of, I'm just after whatever makes sense and whatever is good for the business all round. Unfortunately, there will be times when it's simply a case of, I want X, in which case, be straightforward about it. I can recall many years ago having to deal with a situation involving a work colleague, and after several attempts to get the issue resolved, there was just no resolution coming. So that ended up in a tough conversation where, unfortunately, I just had to go in and say exactly how I wanted them to fix that problem. It doesn't happen all that often. You're better off thinking from the big picture, from the business perspective. But if you can't, at least be straightforward about it. Tip number 4, acknowledge that your boss may have a different perspective and may have different information. It's great for you to say to the boss, look, I understand that you may have information that I don't have on this. This is how it's looking like from my perspective. Is there anything that I need to be aware of that would make it easier for me to understand why this decision was made or why this action was taken? It shows that you think big picture rather than narrowly around what you want. One of the best bits of advice given to me by a manager many, many years ago is that it's okay to focus on the work that you need to do, to focus on your tasks and what have you, but you need to be able to develop the ability to zoom out. So zoom out to your boss's level and be able to look at the issue from that wider context, zoom out to the next level above that, and so on and so forth. And to be in all honesty, I can say that if you practice this ability of being able to zoom out and change your perspective, you might just find yourself in a situation where you don't need to have a difficult conversation because you've already figured out a solution for yourself. I don't recommend we just go around having difficult conversations at the drop of a hat. And I also don't recommend that we don't have them if we need to have them. But I do recommend at least shifting your perspective to see whether or not this is something I need to be dealing with myself rather than raising the issue higher. My last hot tip is to ask for a short-term experiment rather than permanent change. If, for example, you go in because you want to have, say, every second Thursday, you want to finish early or you want to work from home, for example, it can be a bit of a stretch to go from nothing to every Thursday you work from home. So it might be easier to say, how about we trial this? And for the next 3 Thursdays, I'll work from home, then we'll come back and we'll see if this has worked to everyone. And then we can review it at that point. So it's a lot easier for bosses to accept a short-term experiment just to give them comfort that, yes, if this doesn't work, we don't go ahead with it, rather than just say, yes, permanent change, let's do it. The last thing is what to do if things don't go as planned. Now, if you've done all the things we've talked about here, there's a pretty good chance that you will get an outcome that you and your boss are quite happy with. Sometimes you might read things wrong, you might respond in a way that's not appropriate, the boss might respond in a way that's not appropriate. Either way, the prime thing to consider here is the relationship. So the first thing to do is to reset the emotional tone. Understand, raise the issue and say, well, obviously, the conversation didn't go as expected. I'd like to understand why this is upsetting for you, or I'd like you to understand why this is upsetting for me. It might be appropriate at this stage to have a timeout, to come back and have a review of this once everyone's had some time to get some fresh air. Hopefully you don't get to the stage where you've got to walk out and take a fresh air, but if you find yourself in this situation, reset the emotional tone and commit to a shared relationship goal. So make sure that you both understand what's important here is not that this problem is resolved as such, but that we maintain an effective working relationship. I then go on to create a shared narrative. Now, a shared narrative is to get their perspective on what went wrong with this whole difficult conversation, and also to share your perspective on what went wrong. It may be that at this stage you can actually not solve the problem as such, but at least get back to a place where your relationship is back on track. You don't want to walk away from these things with having a difficult conversation that didn't get the outcome that you want and damage the relationship. It's just not worth the trouble. And make sure that you focus on a positive shared history. So you can put things into perspective and say, well, look, we didn't get to where I would have liked to have been with this conversation. It didn't work as planned. If you look back at our history of working together, we've always been able to solve problems. We've always been able to work things out. So, I think we can get things back on track. I'm confident that we can get a solution that gets the relationship back to where it needs to be. And the last thing is building in emotional agility. So just simply don't dig in. They say if you find yourself in a hole, just stop digging. So emotional agility means don't dig in, don't make excuses, don't get upset. Pay attention to their responses and get curious. Ask them why they felt a certain way about something, or why they responded in a certain way. Curiosity is a great way of not only understanding what their needs are, but it also shows that you're listening. And when you're having difficult conversations, it's important for both sides to feel that they've been heard. And then find a productive way of continuing the relationship. Tough conversations are tough. That's why they're called difficult conversations. No one ever finds them easy to have. And right at the start, I said, knowing how to have a tough conversation doesn't make it not a tough conversation. It will always be tough. But if you think about, what's really at stake here, when we are trying to get issues resolved in the workplace, we have a couple of choices. We can either just ignore it, it's too hard, let's not try. And we can end up over time just being disenchanted with the workplace. We can be unhappy. Our resilience can suffer simply because we haven't decided to have a conversation that we needed to have. But if we do decide that we need or want to have more influence over how our careers progress, we want to have some influence about how we are in the workplace, and sometimes a tough conversation is the only way to go. So follow these 6 simple steps for planning for the conversation. Remember the hot tips that I've shared, but at the end of the day, it's all about relationships. Every success in life, whether it be business or personal, comes down to your ability to build strong, effective, and mutually beneficial relationships. So what I'd like you to do from now on is to think about what you're going to stop doing, start doing, change, or continue doing. Are there things that you're doing that you're going to stop as a result of what you've learned here today? Put them in your little action plan that Parminder was talking about earlier. What are some things you're going to start doing because you realize, well, actually, I haven't been doing that before and it will be helpful in these situations? What are some of the things that you're going to change? So these are things you've currently been doing, but you're going to tweak them slightly because they haven't been working quite as you would have liked. And then what are you going to continue doing? Because it's important to recognize where you're currently doing really well. And if I can leave you with a final quote by Peter Drucker, who was a well-known management consultant. He said, people who don't take risks generally make 2 big mistakes a year. People who do take risks generally make 2 big mistakes a year. So if you're wondering whether or not it is worth having difficult conversations, sometimes we have to take prudent risks in order to get what we want and to create the sort of relationship and working environment in which we, our boss, and everyone else thrives. Hope this has been helpful for you. Thank you so much. I'll just see if we have any questions, Parminder.
Yes, we do have a few. I'm just going to give everyone a minute or so to put in any of the questions. First of all, thank you so much. What a great, simple, practical framework. I've scribbled down lots of notes, and my boss better be prepared for the next conversation I'm going to have. And just reflecting, it just takes the fear and anxiety out of that conversation and puts you back in control. And the fact that you do have some influence and some sway. So I think that's really helpful, especially with that power dynamic. I was just wondering, while we give people a couple more minutes to put some questions in, do you have any resources or videos or anything that you'd recommend to help people, a pump up video or something that can help them as they're going through this process?
Yeah, there's some resources that I shared, which I think you'll be sharing after this event. There's a lot of resources out there. The world of YouTube and TEDx is great for finding videos on this sort of thing. But I find that there's very few that really address it in a way that I think makes people feel really comfortable about having these conversations. You can find resources out there. A simple Google will show you some templates for conversations. Now, the reason why I didn't include templates for specific conversations here is, one, there's a lot of them out there that you can find by searching, and also, number 2, the templates sometimes give the impression that the conversations are always about I want. Whereas I think the approach that I prefer people to take is this, well, what makes sense from a business perspective? What's good for me, good for the boss, and good for the environment? When I think about taking action in this kind of scenario, I like to think, is it safe for me? Is it safe for the boss? Is it safe for the workplace? If that's the case, I generally say yes, well then we go ahead and go with it. But if you have any specific requirements, I need to have a difficult conversation about getting a raise, for example. I need to have a difficult conversation about some feedback that I didn't like. There's a lot of them out there. I won't say I found one that would be perfect for what I would do as an approach. There's always some subtle thing I wouldn't do.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I actually have lots of questions, and because we have 10 minutes left, and then I've got a bit of an exciting announcement to make. So please do hang on till 3 o'clock for everyone. But I'm going to quick fire these questions at you.
I'll be brief in my responses. Yeah, go for gold.
Ready. All right, I just want to try and get through as many as we can. Okay, so a question from James. Do you think it's better to do these conversations informally over a beer or coffee or after work, or better in a more formal meeting? And, you know, then how does it work in terms of making a note of what was agreed? What do you think of that?
Yeah, the short answer is I would never have a difficult conversation over a beer. Over a coffee, yes. I guess it has a lot to do with the relationship that you have with your boss. There are some bosses for whom time is so precious that they dispense it almost with an eyedropper. So there are, for those who are familiar with DISC, for example, you know, the D style likes you to get straight down to business. So value their time. If you think your boss is one of these people they're always on the run, they don't have a lot of time, show that you value their time. Make an appointment, keep it brief, get straight down to business. There are some bosses that you'll have that you would think are very more relationships focused, and they like to have a little bit of personal chat before they get into it. It's really a case of understanding how your boss likes to communicate and how they like to be communicated to. If you can get some insight around that, that'll help. But I'd say I would never do it in a social setting. I'd never do it in any way that lessened the importance of what it is I was trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah, and I think from this leads really well to the next question, that understanding your boss and their preferences and how they're generally going to respond makes it much easier to have and prepare for this conversation. So what do you do if, for example, you're new to the business? So this is
We've lost Parminder, but I'm going to assume what happens if you're new to the business and you don't really know the boss all that well. You may not know the boss, you may not know their preferences, you may not know them well personally, but at the very least, if you're new to the business, understand what as much as you can about what the boss's needs are. You know, there may be pressures with deadlines, there may be pressures with certain KPIs. If you've got a problem, if you can tie the solution of that problem to whatever that need is, you're bound to get a better audience. As every boss that's out there is trying to get an outcome, and the more you can understand what outcomes are they're trying to achieve, the easier it is for you to approach a difficult conversation with this understanding of what's in it for me with them from the boss's perspective. I think Parminder's back now, so we can go on to the next one.
Yep, I'm sorry about that. So the next question, I actually just had some feedback. Somebody is suggesting that you write a book if you haven't already, and really thanking you for a great session.
Thank you.
So one of the other questions is, one second, I'm just scrolling there. How does an organization create a culture where conversations like this are frequent?
Wow, that's an all-encompassing question and a really, really good one. When it comes to what sort of culture allow these conversations to occur, it's those cultures that do a lot of self-reflection, not just at certain levels, but cultures that reflect on whether or not they operate true to their values as an organization, whether they have values that respect feedback, for example. A couple of months ago, some of you may have been on my talk about building a culture of feedback. There are a few things that I think organizations need to do really, really well to enable these sorts of conversations to have, and that is, one, build accountability instead of blame. Get rid of blame out of the conversation and build a culture of accountability. Number two, look at how we create a culture of feedback where it's okay to give feedback. It's something that helps all of us improve. And thirdly, organizations that invest in, and this might sound self-serving, I do apologize, but do invest in learning and development of their people. You know, making sure that their leaders are great coaches and mentors, making sure that people understand their personal styles and the styles of people around them so that we can facilitate better communication and better relationships. When you have these things within an organization, what would be a tough conversation elsewhere is a simple feedback conversation in here. So when you take your organization to that next level, it makes it a lot easier to have these conversations. And that's the only way I think these become less than tough conversations. They just become feedback. I hope that answers that question.
Absolutely. Just another quick one on, and somebody's made a comment here about how this actually framework could be used for any difficult conversation, not just one with your boss, which I think is a great point. But would you recommend that people use this kind of framework for conversations about a salary raise, for example, which is obviously quite, very difficult conversation, very personal. Is there anything additional that you'd recommend that they could include to help that conversation?
It helps to have a little bit of data, a bit of evidence. It's one thing to go in and ask for a pay rise because you think you deserve it, and you probably do. But if you can show where your pay fits within expected pay scales, if you have some evidence to support why what you do actually brings more value to the organisation than your remuneration suggests, then you can use this framework to have this sort of conversation. I'm a huge fan of being well prepared for any kind of meeting with any data or any evidence. Data tends to support a really, really good argument. Think critically about what you're trying to present. Am I presenting the best possible case? Step into your boss's shoes and think from the boss's perspective, is this person making a really solid case for getting a pay rise? And then good luck with it.
That's great advice. Thank you, Grant. I think there'll be a lot of people asking for pay rises after this. All right, and that about, it's nearly time. We've got a couple of minutes left. And what I just wanted to do is to just say a big, big thank you to all of our facilitators today. So that's Mark, Marnie, Rupert, and of course, Grant, for giving up their time to come and deliver these excellent sessions. I hope you've all taken something away. A big thank you to the IML team who are running around doing all the behind the scenes work, especially to our programs delivery team. With a special shout out to Libby, Joe and Naomi for all your hard work. And of course to all of you attendees today. It's really important for these sessions that you guys find it practical, you find it relevant, and you can take something back to the workplace and that you've used those action plans. So what's next, Grant? If I could just ask you to move to the next slide. I'm really pleased to announce, this is hot off the press, it's not even on the website yet, that our next development day is in the works. It's been scheduled for the 9th of September, so pop that in your diary. It's going to be on positive workplace cultures, which I think is going to be a really interesting topic. And then as soon as we've got those links ready for you to register, we will send them to you via an email. All the content today is taken from our leadership program. So whether that's Essentials, Foundations, or Accelerate. I think you're doing an Essentials course at the moment. You're running one of those for us, aren't you, Grant? Or about to? Yeah, yes. There we go. And also our masterclasses, which we are running virtually, and you can find out more information about those on our website. We do have a special end of financial year discount that we're doing, so please contact us if you'd like to know more and pre-book anyone, make the most of the rest of your budget. Remember, you can have all the resources from all of today's sessions upon request. You need to email those 2 email addresses depending on where you are in the world, to get access to those, and you will be sent a recording for each of the sessions that you've registered for. I think that about closes off the day for us. Anything else from you, Grant? Any last words of wisdom that you want to leave with our session?
No, look, I'd like to thank everyone for turning up today, and I hope you find something useful from this session as well as all the others. And just go out there and start to put these things into practice. The learning only has an impact if you start to apply it. So get out there and give it a good crack.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.